The laughter echoed across the beautifully decorated garden just as the elegant gift box slipped from my hands and landed at my stepdaughter's feet. She looked at the simple wrapping, curled her lip in disappointment, and loudly called it the cheapest wedding gift anyone had brought. Guests froze in uncomfortable silence while a few exchanged embarrassed glances. Some smiled awkwardly, believing the moment would quickly pass. They had no idea that within minutes, every person standing there would realize they had judged that plain little box far too soon, and one young woman would discover that love can never be measured by shiny paper or expensive ribbons. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters. Margaret Ellison had never imagined that falling in love again would require so much courage. At 58, she had already buried one husband, spent years rebuilding her life, and convinced herself that happiness belonged to younger people. Then she met Graham Porter at a neighborhood volunteer event where they spent an afternoon repainting a children's community center. Their friendship grew slowly through quiet lunches, long walks, and countless conversations about family, loss, and the strange ways life sometimes surprises people. Graham had one daughter, 28-year-old Vivian Porter, who adored her late mother and had never accepted the idea of another woman joining the family. Margaret understood the pain behind Vivian's cold behavior and never tried to replace anyone. She respected the memories that filled the Porter home and patiently accepted every distant greeting, every ignored message, and every uncomfortable holiday gathering. She believed that genuine love could not be forced. It could only be demonstrated through patience and consistency. Over the next 3 years, Margaret quietly celebrated Vivian's accomplishments from a distance. She mailed birthday cards that were rarely acknowledged. She attended charity events supporting Vivian's architectural firm without expecting recognition. She even knitted a beautiful blanket after hearing Vivian mention during a family dinner that handmade gifts reminded her of childhood comfort. The blanket remained unopened in its package for nearly a year. Friends often questioned why Margaret continued trying so hard. She always smiled gently because she remembered something her late husband had once told her. People carrying invisible grief often build walls instead of bridges. They do not always reject love because they dislike it. Sometimes they reject it because they fear losing it again. When Graham proposed beneath a magnificent oak tree during a sunny spring afternoon, Margaret accepted with joyful tears. She also knew the engagement would test whatever fragile peace existed between herself and Vivian. Wedding preparations unfolded beneath bright skies over several joyful months. Graham wanted a grand celebration filled with relatives, neighbors, old friends, and co-workers. Margaret preferred something smaller but happily agreed because she wanted the day to become a celebration of family rather than another reminder of old divisions. Vivian remained polite but emotionally distant. She attended planning meetings only when necessary and spoke mostly about schedules, decorations, and seating charts. Margaret noticed that every practical conversation carefully avoided anything personal. Despite the emotional distance, Margaret never gave up hope. One afternoon while organizing old family photographs with Graham, Margaret discovered a worn leather journal belonging to Graham's late wife. She immediately offered to return it untouched, but Graham quietly explained that he had already read every page years ago. Near the back of the journal was a handwritten letter intended for Vivian if life ever separated them too soon. Graham admitted that he had never found the courage to give it to his daughter because the grief had always been overwhelming. Every year he postponed the conversation, believing another time would somehow feel easier. Margaret carefully placed the journal back into its protective cloth sleeve and said nothing more. But an idea quietly began growing in her heart. Instead of purchasing an extravagant wedding gift for Vivian, Margaret spent weeks working with a professional conservator who carefully restored the fragile journal without changing a single handwritten word. She ordered a handcrafted walnut keepsake box engraved with a simple message. "For every tomorrow, remember yesterday." Inside the box she placed the restored journal, several faded family photographs professionally repaired, childhood drawings Graham had preserved for decades, a silver charm bracelet that had belonged to Vivian's mother, and a sealed envelope. The envelope contained legal documents transferring ownership of Margaret's lakeside cottage into a trust that would someday belong entirely to Vivian, regardless of whatever happened in the future. Margaret had inherited the cottage from her own parents, and although it held countless cherished memories, she believed it could become a place where future generations would gather in peace. She never mentioned any of it to Graham. She wanted the gift to speak for itself. The wedding day arrived beneath brilliant sunshine. Colorful flowers lined the outdoor ceremony while laughter floated through the warm afternoon breeze. Guests celebrated the joyful union, applauded heartfelt vows, and admired the simple elegance of the occasion. Toward the end of the reception, family members exchanged thoughtful gifts. Margaret stepped forward carrying the modestly wrapped walnut box. Compared to the luxury gift bags and sparkling packages surrounding it, her present appeared surprisingly plain. Vivian glanced at it, laughed nervously, and said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear that it looked like the cheapest wedding gift at the entire celebration. The music seemed to disappear. Conversation stopped. Even children paused their games. Margaret felt the familiar sting of public embarrassment but refused to let hurt become anger. She simply smiled gently and encouraged Vivian to open the box before deciding its value. Several guests looked away, expecting another painful family argument. Instead, Vivian slowly untied the ribbon. She lifted the lid. Everything changed. The restored journal rested carefully on soft velvet alongside the photographs, bracelet, and sealed envelope. Confusion replaced irritation. She carefully picked up the journal and immediately recognized her mother's handwriting. Her hands began trembling. She opened to the final pages. Sunlight illuminated every carefully preserved word as tears gathered in her eyes. The letter described a mother's endless hope that if another kind woman ever entered Graham's life, Vivian would judge her by her heart rather than by comparison. It spoke about forgiveness, courage, and the possibility that love could grow without replacing old memories. Her mother wrote that families sometimes become larger without anyone being forgotten, and she prayed her daughter would never mistake loyalty to the past for fear of the future. Guests watched silently as tears rolled freely down Vivian's face. She turned each fragile page more slowly than the last. The restored photographs revealed smiling family vacations she barely remembered. Her childhood drawings looked brighter than they had in decades. The silver bracelet reflected warm afternoon sunlight exactly as it must have years earlier on her mother's wrist. Finally she opened the envelope. Inside rested the trust documents for the lakeside cottage along with a handwritten note from Margaret. The note explained that homes become meaningful because of the people welcomed inside them, not because of the names written on ownership papers. Margaret hoped that one day children, grandchildren, cousins, and lifelong friends would fill every room with laughter, and she wanted Vivian to know she would always have a place where family could gather without conditions or expectations. Vivian looked around at the silent crowd. Only moments earlier she had publicly embarrassed the woman who had quietly spent years loving her without demanding anything in return. The expensive gifts surrounding the reception tables suddenly seemed insignificant. She slowly closed the box and began remembering every overlooked act of kindness Margaret had offered over the years. The birthday cards. The blanket. The supportive presence at charity events. The patient smiles. The gentle respect for memories that were never threatened in the first place. For the first time, Vivian saw not an outsider trying to replace her mother, but a compassionate woman trying to honor her while building something new. Without speaking, she crossed the short distance between them and wrapped her arms around Margaret in a long embrace that neither woman wanted to end. Many guests quietly wiped away tears. Even Graham stood speechless, overwhelmed by the moment unfolding before him. The photographer captured countless beautiful images throughout the wedding, but none matched the power of that single embrace beneath the bright afternoon sun. The following weeks transformed the family in unexpected ways. Vivian finally opened the knitted blanket and placed it across the reading chair in her living room. She invited Margaret to lunch without Graham for the first time. Together they organized old family photographs, planted flowers around the lakeside cottage, and shared stories about the people they had loved and lost. Margaret never attempted to erase the past. Vivian no longer feared the future. Instead, they discovered that healing often begins when someone chooses understanding over pride. Months later, the lakeside cottage hosted its first large family gathering. Children ran through the grass chasing butterflies while grandparents laughed from shaded picnic tables. Old photographs decorated the walls beside new ones, proving that love expands when hearts remain open. The greatest gift exchanged that wedding day had never been the restored journal, the valuable property, or the treasured bracelet. It had been the opportunity to replace misunderstanding with compassion. Before we finish, tell us in the comments, have you ever realized that someone's true value was hidden behind a simple first impression, and what did that experience teach you? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that the most precious gifts rarely arrive wrapped in the brightest paper. They arrive through quiet sacrifices, patient hearts, and people who choose to keep loving even when appreciation takes years to bloom. Sometimes the simplest box carries the greatest treasure of all, the chance for a family to heal, forgive, and begin again.